I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order at 7:03. This is the Planning Commission meeting for January 15, 2019. Can we start with roll call, please?
Chair Mason.
Here.
Vice Chair Lagasse.
Here.
Commissioner Biasotti.
Here.
Commissioner Johnson is absent. Commissioner Lethine.
Here.
Okay. Commissioner Lethin, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So the first item on the agenda is the approval of the December 18, 2018 minutes. Does the commission have any questions or comments? Okay, so I do have a comment. I'm going to it. Yes. So I just have one comment. It is on, I believe it's page 7. And it was somewhere in this conversation. It's not reflected in the minutes, but I just wanted to ask staff to review and listen to the minutes one more time, because at some point there was a chart that was placed on the screen that had the amounts and the locations that the impact fees would be spent on. And I recall asking the question of where the $55 million came from the library, because Half Moon Bay had only spent $24 million. And I just wanted to make sure that that was reflected in the minutes, because it was such a huge difference between the suggested, between the amount that we were saying here in San Bruno and what was spent somewhere else within the last year. The other question I wanted to bring up, or the other comment I wanted to ask staff to take a look at, is there was there was some conversation going on around the discomfort of approving the projects, and this is on page 9. And I just wanted to be clear that it says Commissioner Mason stated her discomfort with approving these projects because it limited the ability for meaningful review of the Planning Commission. And there was a comment about making sure that we're not just rubber stamping these permits. So if that could be reviewed by staff as well and ensure that the record reflects what was said in that case. So with that said, and if there's no other comments, does anybody have a motion?
I motion that we approve the minutes of the meeting of December 18, 2018.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, so all agree?
Aye.
Say aye.
Aye.
We have a unanimous decision. So the approval of the minutes is passed, and we'll move on to agenda item 2, communications.
Staff has no communications at this time.
Thank you. Agenda item 3, selection. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me actually go back. Item 3 is public comment on items not on the agenda. We'll start with the request to address the Planning Commission, Allison Mazzola.
Oh, are you here for items not on the agenda, though? No, that's not. Oh, okay. So we'll wait for that.
Okay.
After the presentation. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you. My apologies.
No worries.
Is there any public comment for items not on the agenda? Seeing as how there is none, we'll move on to 4, announcement of conflict of interest. Are there any conflicts tonight? No. Seeing as how there is none, we'll move on to agenda item 5, city staff discussion.
Hi. Darcy Smith, Community and Economic Development Director for the City of San Bruno. Miriam, can you please check the volume in the room? Thank you so much. So the first item under staff discussion is the selection of the February 14th, 2019 Architectural Review Committee members. Do we have 2 volunteers? Rick Biasotti, thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Biasotti.
I can do it.
You do it? Okay, great. Chair Mason, thank you. Next, I have one more. Sorry, Commissioner Lagasse, or Vice Chair Lagasse. Sorry, thank you. Next, I have just a few updates. I wanted to point out 2 important city meetings that are coming up, and I gave you the flyers. And the first is next Tuesday on January 22nd at 5:30 p.m. Here at the Senior Center, we have the State of the City Address, where the mayor will make an address starting at 6 o'clock p.m. Traditionally, this address is often coordinated with the chamber, and so this is exciting that we're going to be holding it in the Senior Center before the council meeting. So I would invite all of you to attend or watch it later. Second, we have a parking town hall. That's the next night. It's on Wednesday, January 23rd, also at the Senior Center starting at 6 o'clock p.m. The purpose of that town hall is to discuss parking issues in the downtown area and surrounding residential neighborhoods. Next, I just wanted to provide an update that the City Council last week approved the contract to hire consultants, the firm of WRT, to prepare the San Mateo Avenue Streetscape Plan. That is a streetscape plan for the downtown portion of San Mateo Avenue. And the streetscape plan was called for in the transit corridor plan and the general plan, so it is something that the city has been aspiring to do for many years. And the goal of that streetscape plan is to have a comprehensive plan for streetscape improvements. Those include the sidewalk, the landscaping, the street trees, the street lights, the street furniture, but also look at pedestrian improvements such as bulb outs, crosswalks, flashing signals for the pedestrian crossings in the downtown, and to look at also things like public art and wayfinding signage and gateways. So that process, the community engagement portion of that, will hopefully kick off in February, but I just wanted you to be aware that you will be receiving some invitations to some community engagement meetings, and we do hope to schedule it for the Planning Commission study session in March or April and get your input early on, and then return to you for adoption of the plan in the summer, and ultimately City Council would review it and adopt the plan. And if you want to get more information about that San Mateo Avenue Streetscape Plan, there's the staff report associated with the City Council meeting, and we also attached the consultant's proposal, the schedule, and the PowerPoint for the presentation. Those are also available on the website. Last, I just wanted to point out some training opportunities that I wanted to communicate to the Planning Commission. There is an exciting session on January 31st. January 31st. And that session is hosted by our local 21 Elements organization and also Home for All and the American Planning Association. It's titled Becoming a Leader on Your Local Planning Commission, and it's in San Mateo at the San Mateo Library, starting at 6:30 to 8:30. Then I wanted to mention to the Commission that there's the League of California Cities Planning Commissioners Academy, and that is in Long Beach this year from March 6th to 8th. But if you would like to attend, please follow up with staff. And last, we have a session also hosted by 21 Elements, Home for All, and the American Planning Association titled Housing in San Mateo County, Understanding a Changing Landscape, and that's on April 30th, also at the San Mateo Library. And those 2 local sessions are completely free. But if you would like to attend, please let staff know. We can assist you with that. So that concludes the staff updates. And unless you have any questions for us, we can move on to conduct of business.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight the city address, just because this came up in the city council meeting last week, and I wanted to commend the city council because there were comments received after last year's State of the City address that it was held in the middle of the day when people work and couldn't attend, and it was $40 per person. So I wanted to commend the city council for changing that to an hour when people can attend after regular work hours, and it is free to the public. So thank you. So with that, we'll move on to agenda item 6, conduct of business. We're going to go ahead and adjourn right now to the community engagement portion, and this portion will not be televised. So
Sorry, correction. We will televise it up until we complete the PowerPoint
presentation.
and the comments from the public, and then the questions and answers from the commission. But at the end of that, then we'll break into the community engagement session, and then the video feed will be cut off. Thank you.
Can you let us know when we cut off
I
the
will.
video feed?
I will
Thank you
cue
so
you.
much.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Michael Smith, Planning Department staff. I want to thank everyone for coming today. This is something we've been trying to put together. We listened to the commissioner, to the public and to the commission to try to have this type of meeting where we can get more public input and really start drilling down into our small cell ordinance that we're trying to put together. Our meeting today is not an ordinance per se, but more of the design guidelines that go along with how we're going to put that into a design standards document to regulate them when we finally do receive them. So addressing this issue requires input from everyone, so we are glad you're here. And as we think about the best ways to move forward, we find your input extremely valuable. So during tonight's meeting, we're going to do a few things. The first is we've already had 2 study sessions with both the public and the commission. Those took place in October and November of last year. So we'll recap those study sessions today. We'll summarize key feedback that staff received from those study sessions. We'll provide the public and the commission with the latest updates on the FCC order regarding small cells. We'll share next steps and ways for the public and to stay involved in the process. And then lastly, we'll break and we'll do a community input session in the same room, and those are the boards that you see on the edges of the room. And so we'll have staff manning those boards to try to get your input on the design. So starting with the first meeting was held in October 12th of 2018. The learning objectives that came from that meeting, the first thing we wanted to do is try to get a shared understanding so that everyone's on the same page about what is coming at us and what we need to do about it. So we started off by giving some background on our existing wireless regulations. We went into the Federal Telecommunications Act of 1996. We reviewed our San Bruno's current wireless ordinance, which is Section 12.220 of our code. We talked about what is a small cell, because the federal government has very specific guidelines for what that is. And in case you don't remember, it's an antenna that's a facility that's less than 50 feet in height or less, has an antenna that's 3 cubic feet or less, and the associated equipment is 28 cubic feet or less. And for those trying to imagine what that looks like, 28 cubic feet is a little bit larger than a refrigerator. We provided a list of current applications that we have in the city for small cells in the right-of-way. We went over PUC code 7901, and we talked about the FCC limitations on how we can regulate these facilities. And then lastly, we talked about what other communities are doing, because that was a big part of there was a certain sentiment out there that other communities were doing more to stop this than we were, so we kind of brought that to light to make sure we're all on the same page about what exactly those other communities are doing and what is the result of that. And then we had another study session with the Planning Commission in November, on November 20th, 2018. The learning objectives of that meeting were, again, to get more background on the federal regulations, and just kind of reiterating, talk about the shot clocks, and those shot clocks are the time periods under which the city has to review these projects when they come in for review, and they're submitted by a wireless company. And we talked about the different types of small cell facilities. We talked about the range of these facilities, which is anywhere from 100 to 500 feet. We looked at some sample criteria from other communities that have already got a jump on preparing some new design regulations. And we also took a look at some of the aesthetic criteria and the location criteria from those communities. So the key feedback that we've received from those meetings, we heard the community loud and clear that safety and potential health risks are at the forefront of most residents' minds, and so we are definitely cognizant of that. We also identified that municipalities moving forward are going to be tasked with trying to review these applications in a very, very, very short window. And if we can't do that, what we do is we have the applicant calling shot clock and asking us, saying that applications are deemed complete. And so we just that was one of the things that came out of it. Heard the community, there's a preference for these facilities not to be located in residential zones, although federal law allows them to be located there as well. We heard from the commission that they wanted flexibility in the type of guidelines that we impose on these so that we're not painting ourselves too much into a corner or a box. And then lastly, that the city should oppose the FCC order, and we have joined the coalition. So with today's meeting, and study session and community engagement meeting, the learning objectives we're hoping to get out of today's meeting is to provide a status update on the FCC small cell order, because we do have some things to update you on. Gather community input on potential aesthetic/design and location options through the use of interactive feedback stations, which is again what we have around the edges of the room. And provide clear information about the next steps in San Bruno we'll be taking and how the community can stay informed. So, starting off with the update on the FCC small cell order. So the coalition is a group of cities that have sued the federal government basically, and they have requested a stay of the FCC order, and that was denied. Which means cities will still need to respond to applications that are submitted as of today, January 15th, 2019, pursuant to the new shot clocks. And so what that means, we don't have design standards yet, because that's why we're here today, but if a carrier were to come in the door today, they could come in with several applications at one time. We call that batching. And asked to be, and we have to review them according to these new guidelines, which is a 60-day window. So they did say that the aesthetic standards for regulating these facilities need to be in place. Communities need to have these guidelines in place by April 15th of this year. So that's what we're working towards. And if you don't have them in place right now, even though applicants can submit under the new shot clocks right now, then you have to go by what you have in your ordinance today, as far as design standards are concerned. So the city is working to meet this April 15th deadline, and part of what we're doing today will help feed into that process. The coalition did file a motion to have all of these cases that were filed in different jurisdictions heard by one court in the Ninth Circuit in San Francisco. One case has already been transferred to that court, and which was a request of the coalition. And completing the transfers to that court could take, for the other cases, could take several months. So about the meeting structure today for this community engagement piece that we're going to do directly following the presentation. We have the interactive stations. We're looking at types of facilities. We're going to be looking at facility aesthetic options and facility location options. And so each one of these stations covers a different area. And what we're looking at is we have ways for people to express their preference using the dots based upon what they see on boards. So the guiding principles of all this is to achieve compliance with the new federal laws, protect historic, cultural, and scenic resources here in San Bruno, implement objective standards. As we've discussed earlier in the previous study sessions, our current standards are very subjective, and so we need to make them more objective so that they could be reviewed in a shorter time frame. We need to maximize local control with our guidelines, and then preserve neighborhood character as well, and that includes that can be done by limiting the number, limiting the type, limiting the visibility of these structures in neighborhoods, by concealing equipment, and finding the least intrusive locations. And then lastly, we would, but not least, facilitate community involvement in the overall process. So before I jump into the overall aesthetic guidelines and kind of what you see there on the boards as well, there's just some key questions I think that we should all be thinking about as we look at the boards. And so I put some of them on the slide right here. And so some of the things you might want to ask yourself is, should multiple antennas be allowed at a facility? Is that something we want to regulate? Where should the antenna be located on the facility? There's different ways to locate antennas. On top of the pole, or on an arm on the side, or a brand new pole. And then what are homeowners' primary concerns? What are their primary design concerns? Should the antennas be enclosed? There's different ways of enclosing the antennas to conceal what it looks like and make it look much more presentable. How much equipment should be permitted on the poles, or where should the equipment go in the first place? There's different locations for that. Should it be painted? Most communities require that the equipment be painted to match. And then there's a whole thing around the accessory equipment and what you do with that. There's different ways to approach that as well. So these are the 3 different types of facilities we're going to be, that we found to be out there and that we get presented with. We have the wooden utility poles. That's the one. Let's see. That's that one right there. And then we have street lights. So they put them on street lights, and there it is at the top. And then lastly, we have a standalone pole. So this is brand new infrastructure in the city, and sometimes that is what is presented. Now, within the wooden utility pole type, we have a sidearm, and that's what we're calling this one right here on the side, where the antenna is mounted a little ways down on the pole. We have the top mount pole, which is sometimes called a bayonet, but it extends the pole usually several feet to meet PUC guidelines, to get out of the way of the actual wires and what workers need to do. And then we also have, on the far right here, is the one that's in line and it's mounted to the wire. Now, the next type is the street light pole antenna. Up there kind of is a drawing, but on top, so we call that the top mounted one. In the middle here is a pole that has an antenna top to it, but it's more of a, I'm not quite sure what you call that type of antenna, but it definitely looks different, but that's also a pole mounting option. To the far right, we have the antenna mounted to the back side of the pole. And then down at the bottom, we have the antenna mounted to the mast arm of the light pole. And then over here underneath, we have the antenna mounted towards the top of the pole, but kind of embedded in the pole a little bit and kind of made a little bit bulkier, as you can see there. Might be a little bit hard to see, but That one's a little bit bulkier up the top, and that's where the antenna is. One thing to keep in mind with a lot of these is if you don't see the equipment on the pole itself, there's usually going to have to be a box located at grade level. Now, new poles, these are just some of the ones that I came across, but there are others, and I think that the universe of this might be almost unlimited. How you can try to hide a new pole in type of a structure. So again, we have the brand new pole, and that's kind of at the top right there. You can clearly see that the antenna is in the top of the pole. This one is a more sleek-looking pole where the diameter of the pole is much more consistent from top to bottom. Same thing with that one in the middle. It's another more consistent pole, but you can see the box off in the distance there to the side. We have the fake tree. Some communities are going towards the fake tree, and this is not the only fake tree type. There are others. They can come up with a lot of different trees if that's the direction we want to go. And then over here to the far right is a street sign, and so they've had some ability to incorporate it into a street sign. But what I'm noticing here with these is that the street sign ones, depending on the mounting location, appears to be much shorter than some of the other ones. And so I would be curious to know what the propagation of that signal is and whether or not you're going to need more. Now, we're not wireless experts, so I just, and we haven't really been talking to carriers about this, so, but it's just something based upon my experience that comes into play, that the higher the antenna, the easier it is to propagate the signal. Now, the next thing I want to cover is the equipment boxes. So there on the far left in the upper corner is your basic equipment box. Just pretty standard. We have many of these in the community as already. A lot of them are AT&T U-verse boxes and other types of cable equipment. And so that's generally what those look like. The one right next to it is equipment mounted on a pole, and it's shrouded so that you can't actually see the individual boxes. And so it gives it more of a uniform look, and it's painted. So the next one is obviously a faux trash can, a fake trash can. Some communities are doing that. They're using existing infrastructure to try to hide the equipment cabinets instead of having the big box. And those who do have the boxes are sometimes using them as art pieces. So that's another approach. We also have the relay box for the mailbox. That's also fake or faux. And lastly, down in the corner there is what it would look like on a pole if you did not have a shroud or cover over it. Now, the next thing I want to go into is location. And so things to keep in mind when you're thinking about how to locate these in a community. Are there particular locations of existing poles that are less preferable for antennas and associated equipment? Because you have to basically imagine that anything in the public right-of-way that is tall enough could become a place where a carrier might want to locate. Should additional poles or towers within the right-of-way be allowed by the city? That's something we should be asking ourselves. And then, again, what are homeowners' primary concerns, and can they be addressed through proper siting of these facilities? So when it comes to siting, I've read some guidelines that try to discourage more visible locations. And so I went on the street view, and just for an example, I found an antenna at a very visible street intersection. And so some communities try to encourage not ones that are very visible when multiple streets come into an intersection, but more mid-block locations. So this kind of helps kind of visualize what that could be like. Other communities also prefer poles that are located on the shared property line. So as opposed to a pole or existing infrastructure that might be located right in front of someone's house or walkway, they prefer carriers to go on those poles that are kind of right where the two property lines come together. So there's just less visual interference with the property owner. And then I found this one as well. You can discourage putting it right in front of people's windows as well. So this is an antenna on an existing pole located right in, what looks like right in front of someone's bedroom window. And then we have separation requirements, so we should consider separation requirements. Some communities limit how closely you can put them together, and so I just brought this in as a diagram. You can see the dots represent the locations, and you can provide a radius around that location before you can put another one. So, going into next steps, staff will draft a new ordinance and a resolution and design guidelines based on community feedback from tonight's meeting and Planning Commission feedback as well from previous study sessions. And again, the reduced shot clocks are effective now. We haven't gotten any applications, but today is that first day. The deadline for putting these guidelines together is April 15th, 2019. And whatever we do has to go both through the Planning Commission and the City Council. In February / March, we'll, if we get input here today, we can come back to you at one of those meetings with a proposed ordinance. And that's when we can actually, you'll have something in front of you to kind of comment on. And we're looking at March / April for a City Council meeting. So from here, this kind of concludes my presentation. And again, we're going to break out into the different community workstations that we have on the edges of the room. Feel free, we estimate this will take 30 to 45 minutes for this process, but we're here as long as needed. We want to give everyone a chance to speak. Staff will be manning the tables and will be available to answer any questions that you may have. Keep in mind that staff we're not wireless experts, and we're not legal experts as well, but we're doing our best. This is a very new thing that's happening. A lot of communities are trying to deal with it, and we're doing the best we can. And we've also, at the stations, have community input forms, and those you can take away if you can't stay here today. You can fill out those forms and you can email them to staff. The email address is both at the bottom of this slide and at the bottom of the actual form. So if you can't stay any longer but you have comments, feel free to email us later on. And that concludes my portion of the presentation.
Thank you. Did staff want us to take public comments now or at the end? Okay, so we'll go into public. Thank you. We'll go into public comment. Thank you for the presentation. First up is Allison Mazzola.
Oh, Commissioner, do you prefer the commissioners to ask their questions of staff after the public or before?
So I could be wrong, but I was informed that this was not a meeting for questions to be asked.
Well, it is a planning commission meeting, so we can certainly take questions. Sorry. It is an official planning commission meeting, and we can take questions from you.
So, I'm sorry, Ms. Mazzola. Let's go ahead and open this up to the commission then for questions, because they might answer some of the questions that the public has. Thank you. Go ahead.
Through the chair, can you tell us if there are some of these types you went over that are currently prevalent among the existing applications for facilities in San Bruno?
Yes. So all of the applications that we've gotten so far are for wooden utility poles, top-mounted. So that would involve, similar to 123 Elm, extending the pole up about anywhere from 5 to 10 feet, and with the antenna mounted on top. But the carriers are they're flexible on their design, and so even for that project, 123 Elm, at the council at the last minute, the carrier tried to present both a sidearm design and a new pole design. So you can see that they have other options. So it's really about us deciding what kind of options we want as a community, and then making that clear to them. And then I think that they will take that lead.
Okay, and I think that was briefly discussed at one of the previous sessions, but can you refresh my memories on whether there is any indication, any plan for undergrounding of electrical or utilities in San Bruno?
I have not heard of any such plan at this point, but if we research it and find out different information, we will update you at the next meeting.
Is it an issue that we should consider or that should be considered in preparing those new standards and guidelines? What to do if a pole is removed and the facility the small cell facility has to be relocated?
So if there was an approval of a facility, it would have conditions of approval that would address that, but it's also something the carrier would need to address, because the carriers are the ones who have the agreements to position themselves on utility poles.
Okay. Thank you.
Through the chair. The April 15th date, the decisions that we make at that point, is that fixed, that decision, or can we adjust it as time goes on if we discover that something's not working for us?
The April 15th date is from the federal order.
Right.
So it's not something that the city has.
No, but we're going to come up with guidelines that have to be approved by the 15th. If looking forward 6 months from now we discover something that we want to adjust, is it still flexible enough to adjust at that point? Okay.
Yeah, we anticipate that there will be the ordinance and the design standards, and the design standards would be separate, and we anticipate at this point that they would be adopted by resolution by the city council. Mm-hmm. And the intent there is to allow them to be updated over time. Okay. And the ordinance could also be amended over time.
Thank you.
Okay. I might just have then, in that case, if we can ask questions, some questions as well. Has the city looked at the possibility of placing these at parks, city buildings, parking lots, anywhere that is not residential? We have quite a few in the city, and I'm wondering if those would actually cover what is needed without having to go residential.
Yes, we have looked at that, but what we're hearing from the carriers is that those locations are kind of few and far between, and those are not enough to provide the kind of coverage that they're looking for, and that there are large swaths of the city that are just single-family residential, and those are the areas where they have the most customers, and that's where they need to put the facilities to meet those customers' needs.
And has staff agreed with that assessment?
Yes, I mean, we do know that based upon what we know about the small cells and only having a range of around 100 to 500 feet, that they would need to be closer. And they are still feeding off of the primary cells, which are the large macro cell sites. Many of them are, down here on El Camino Real on different structures. But based upon what we're reading, it does sound logical that is the case.
Okay, I would just comment, there's quite a few pocket parks in San Bruno. We have downtown, we have the Bay Hill, we have Lenardi's. I mean, there's a lot of spaces in San Bruno that seems maybe if since that decision is not final, if staff could continue to explore that option. And then I just wanted to ask also, so today there's really a stark difference from the previous meetings we had in October and November. The conversation today has really shifted to not whether we're going to have these here. It's we're going to have them here, and we're really deciding on what they're going to look like and where they're going to go. And I just want to confirm that that is the case, because before we were looking at the aesthetics, and I know that there was a lot of public comment about the health and safety, which was brought up at the PowerPoint presentation, but today it just sounds like we're really at this point very, very limited, and I understand that from the federal order. So the public today is being asked to identify their preferred options.
That's correct. Our goal here is to get the community input, but I would emphasize a few points. We are working on the ordinance and the design standards, and we hope to present those to you soon. And those will contain the regulations that we anticipate will comply with the federal laws and other applicable regulations. So I would explain that we still need to work on those items and present them to you for review. And our goal here is to get input across the entire city of what these would look like. So we have no applications that we're presenting before you for any action at this point. So there's no locations being decided at all at this point. We just want general input that would be applicable throughout the city.
Okay, and then as far as the options that were shown, is it possible to make selections dependent on where they're going to go? So, for example, the art-like subject might look good with the new, streetscape plan that we end up getting for downtown, and might go with a vision for downtown versus something in a residential area. How is that going to be
Yeah, I think
determined?
we could tailor. So we have the ability through the design standards to examine that sort of exact thing in terms of the placement and the type. And I think that's a good point.
Okay, thank you. So any other?
Through the chair. Tonight I know that we're primarily focusing on the aesthetics of the installations themselves, but I did have a question. Are we going to be looking at all at setting guidelines for the distance between each facility tonight, or are we focusing on the installation aesthetics?
We do have a location section, and that's located right here. So if there is a preference for there to be a separation requirement among these facilities, then that would be expressed at that station right there, and then we can go back and work on it and try to come up with an ordinance that would reflect that.
Great. I know that a couple of the examples that you gave us in previous meetings of other cities' ordinances listed in order of preference types of locations, and I don't know if it's specified distance. Some of them I know specified distance between each location, but are we going to be able, is the community going to be able to discuss their preference as far as maybe itemizing location preference? For example, the bottom of the list being, I'm gathering, probably residential neighborhoods?
Yes, there is space for community members to write in their comments, and so that's where that could be written in.
Okay.
It's just important to remember that even though we could have preferences, a carrier can go right to the lowest preference, and
Based on their
needs. Yeah.
Their need.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Then we'll move into public comment. Thank you, Ms. Mazzola, for waiting.
Good evening. I begin with a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. I wanted to share with you tonight from a report that was published January 26, 2018, regarding the publication of a book. The book is entitled Reinventing Wires, The Future of Landlines and Networks. It was published by the National Institute for Science, Law, and Public Policy in Washington, D.C. It's authored by communications technology expert Dr. Timothy Schoschel, PhD, an international consultant in computer engineering and standardization, faculty member at the University of Colorado, senior research fellow, and he also works for the National Institute for Science, Law, and Public Policy. Dr. Schoschel says we are seeing the present national emphasis on wireless technologies because the triopoly of Verizon, AT&T, and Comcast that dominates our access to the internet imposes artificial scarcity, planned obsolescence, and high prices to maintain their immense profits. It is in their interest to obscure the fact that advanced copper and optical fiber are far superior to wireless in both cost and performance. Government officials have been misled about the adequacy of wireless communications. Legislators should stop enabling the wireless industry's plans for massive deployments of 4G and soon 5G antennas throughout American neighborhoods and instead commit to supporting reliable, energy efficient, and enduring hardwired telecommunications infrastructure that meets the nation's immediate and long-term needs. Only a fiber-based broadband system can overcome the access inequity that second-rate connectivity currently impeding our nation in a myriad of ways. Optical fiber technology comprised of wires that carry data encoded on light beams is easily capable of delivering data rates that are orders of magnitude greater than cable, DSL, and wireless. Wireline stays roughly 2 orders of magnitude ahead, i.e., it is about 100 times faster than wireless. Wireless networks are energy guzzling and not sustainable. A wired connection is the most efficient method to access internet. The average iPhone, for example, uses more energy than a mid-size Energy Star compliant refrigerator. In the 3 years between 2012 and 2015, the wireless cloud increased its carbon footprint by the equivalent of adding 4.9 million cars to the road. This irresponsible trajectory is entirely avoidable using fiber communications networks to the home. 5G and the Internet of Things will enable commercial interests to collect huge troves of data about the most intimate details of our lives, details that can be sold and are captured by botnets. When critical systems are linked to remote actuators and or cloud-based software, these links can become vulnerable, inadequate, or inappropriate. The Internet of Things raises health and safety issues, such as what if a stove or oven is activated by a cell phone when something flammable is nearby? Or what if a hacker in China finds a way to control our door locks, furnaces, or even the national grid system? In addition, wireless technologies may pose a lurking health time bomb with wide-scale ramifications and costs like tobacco, lead, and asbestos. Hardwired internet access would eliminate these difficulties. I recommend that we abandon 5G wireless as it is unneeded by the public or the market. Promotional hype surrounding 5G wireless is a technology push driven more by planned obsolescence and selling new smartphones rather than any demonstrated public or market need that cannot be met by simpler and more enduring wired infrastructure. We already have San Bruno cable. I recommend that our community invest in fiber, and our ordinances should say we want fiber optic, not small towers. Thank you.
Thank you. Simon Mazzola.
Good evening, Planning Commission and staff. Thank you for your time this evening. The chair asked a question, and I think the answer from staff was incorrect. Let me at least offer my opinion on that issue. I think if what our city does is capitulate that we must accept small cell towers, that's a grave mistake. We're currently in litigation with Verizon over whether our regulations are too restrictive. If this city removes the mandate that carriers look to commercial or industrial locations for small cell sites before they come into our residential neighborhoods, That is unnecessary and foolish. If the staff is directing you to do that, please disregard them. Maintain that requirement. If the courts ultimately declare it to be illegal, then I guess we lose. But let's not lose by omitting it. I agree that we should be undergrounding all of our utilities to the extent feasible, and I encourage the Planning Commission to develop an overarching requirement that moves in that direction. It supports an aesthetic denial of additional wires, towers, etc., in our view. The city should prefer the installation of fiber before antennas. With regard to some specifics, I encourage the Planning Commission to do as much as possible that if small cells do occur, that they occur as far away from our residences as possible. I recommend that you encourage and require small cell sites to be located as far away as possible from our bedrooms, from which there is no escape from constant radiation emitted by small cell towers. A requirement that they be sited no less than 250 feet away from bedrooms is one example. With regard to a separation requirement, please go in the maximum direction of as few towers as possible. In following the information provided by the carriers, they note that their antennas may be effective up to 500 feet or 1,000. Don't go as low as 500 feet. Require they be sited at least 1,000 feet from each other. Watch the overlap. Do as much as you can to prevent carrier Verizon from siting on one telephone pole, and AT&T siting on the next, because the cumulative impact of that radiation is something that I believe the city can regulate by requiring spacing between competing cell towers. I recommend that the Planning Commission increase the notification requirement when a city permit is requested. It is currently 300 feet. That is completely inadequate. It should be expanded to 1,000 feet. With regard to these options, I don't consider them much of an option, but in general, locate a cell tower as high and as far away from homes as possible. If that means putting it at the maximum 50 feet, then please put it there before you would allow it at 15 feet or 20 feet, and put it as far away from our living spaces as possible. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Eleni Tripsa?
Good evening. I am also going to quote Marcus Weldon, the CTO of Alcante Lucent, his comment: "Until now, we've designed the networks for people and their needs, and now we're designing for things." That is what 5G is. We had many discussions, and there was also never the ability to state where we currently have. I actually have a presentation to make. I did a search. From my home, there are 582 towers within a 4-mile radius, 690 antennas. I have their owners, and I can also provide you the addresses. There is no gap in coverage. This is not what the people need. Our needs are met and are satisfied. This is strictly for additional monies that they want to impose on us and hurt not only the aesthetics that we're trying to grapple with, because they don't leave us anything else, but our health. So I want to recommend that these towers that we have, and I did another study actually for 567 El Camino, which is City Hall. They have 583 towers, 717 antennas. We have the infrastructure. If they want to put it, they can put it there. I think we need to create an ordinance to utilize the existing and not put it in homes. We do not want it in the neighborhoods because that is not the need. We cannot have the staff go and ask the questions from Verizon. They will give us misinformation as they all have. With all due respect, please, let us do our diligence independently, not with the carriers. Independence is crucial for our survival, our city, our human beings, everything. So I present to you, we have the infrastructure. I will be happy to work with you and show you the addresses and put it in the ordinance that if they want the 5G, then they have to put it on the existing. I also have another piece of information for you. This is a study by Ericsson. Ericsson, as you know, is a manufacturer. Okay, they want to go the maximum allowable, and that is harmful to us. They also have in here that they can put it on existing. They can put it on top of the buildings. They're also aware of what is safe for us and what is safe for the environment. I will be happy to give you this. We're here to help you. We're not here to bicker. However, we want to be heard, and we want to give you the information to make the correct decisions. And it's not allowing them to come every 200 feet in our neighborhoods and our homes. That is unacceptable. Thank you.
Thank you. Leslie?
Through the chair.
Sorry. Yes.
Could we have those, please? Would you mind if we have those? Well, I was going to make it part of the record, if you don't mind.
Leslie Emily?
Thank you. I'm going to let Elaine deliver her information first. I do want to let you know one thing, that we have sent out numerous communications to the City Council, and all this information has been time and again reported to them, with documentation through cell sites that can be reviewed from, different city council meetings across all the cities, most of the cities who are involved in this lawsuit against the FCC. I recall that on the first study meeting, Miss Mason, Chairman Mason, excuse me, you called for information being collected through independent studies so that we could see the actual options available to us. The City Council, I understand from one of these meetings, around the 27th of November, I'll stand corrected if that's not the exact date, called for a study on fiber optics. I didn't hear that mentioned tonight. I haven't heard about any independent study options tonight. We cannot rely on a telecommunication company that is a corporation that has bought into a utility. The designs should correlate with all of the options, if we have to, on telecommunications through Verizon or AT&T. We know for a fact that the CEO, and this information has been passed on to you and has been accepted by the City Council, they have recommended that they have option for 15 to 3,000 feet antennas placed outside our small neighborhoods. There is no reason to bring them in to our neighborhoods with overlapping radiation at 250 feet apart for each one of those particular antenna. I have a grave concern that if we can't stand and take our stand now, we don't want this to be a lost cause. We can make sure that our citizens and our small community is protected. Just make sure we have the independent studies and that these antennae are put outside our small neighborhoods where we are not exposed to high levels of radiation, where we are not fearing for hazards due to wind or fire. And most importantly, we can sleep at night. And I don't see that any of our recommendations or suggestions or our help has been addressed here tonight. So I look to you to take the lead and let's get this corrected. Thank you.
Thank you. Chuck Zelnick?
Thank you. Good evening. I reside at 291 Merced Drive. I'm kind of confused a little bit how we ended up in litigation. Was there a submission to the Planning Commission that from a carrier that they approved, but somebody appealed it and overruled it? So that's where I'm kind of confused of how did we get there to that point. So if you could clarify that, I'd appreciate it. Within the city of San Bruno, we do have, well, they're called repeaters, but they're similar, I think, to what these small towers are. Our topography is such that there's dead holes throughout the city. Our PD uses repeaters to get to areas that they can make contact through the cell phones of the police officers to be able to work whatever situation is being handled. They don't necessarily go on a two-way radio. Those have been in existence for quite some time. The other point is we have cell towers in residential areas already. Church of the Highlands, located in a residential area, they have a massive amount on their marquee of cell towers. Bel Air Elementary School has a huge facility of cell towers that have been approved by whoever at the time the school district allowed them to put them. So you're fooling yourself if you don't think this is in our cities and in our residential areas already. We're a free market country, and everybody has a right to sell the consumer whatever they want to choose. You can put stuff on the poles or wherever, but unless you have all the poles in the ground, what do you do if an earthquake hits and all these lines go down? Fiber optic's not going to do you any good. Nothing's going to do you any good other than cell service. Now, the questions I have concerning is, would there be an option for a petitioner for a permit to use these towers? Would there be a couple options that may be used in particular areas? The other thing I think is important is that if they're locating one at 380 something Amador, which is diagonally across from my property, I don't have a problem with them putting there, but we have to look at what their choice is of what goes there. So I think wherever they're proposing to put this type of product on the poles, that community within 300 feet should have a say in what style, what design it works for. Because this is not one pair of pants that fits all, okay? If they're wanting this one, maybe there's another place they could locate it to make it amenable. I mean, I've watched in the 2000 when I sat on a school board, the contractors at Portola Elementary were walking in the field trying to find self-service, and they couldn't because they didn't have Verizon. We've had Verizon over 15 years. My cell phone doesn't work very well at all. I take care of my 2 grandchildren during the day. They like to see mom and dad. I hook it up. I can't get a signal. I have to drag them outside for them to see their parents. So it's not that I think everybody putting their input should look at it from the basis of the entire city, because this ordinance is going to cover the entire city and not just your little portion of the city. And that's why I'm saying I think I would like it that if they're proposing to put something at a particular site, that within 300 feet or 500, I don't know what the standard is now of notification purposes, that group of people decide, one, if they want it or don't, but they may not have that issue. They may be able to, though, control the design and the placement of it. So when you look throughout the city, there are wireless systems. You got to be realistic. When the power lines go down, when the poles go down, wireless is the only thing that's going to keep you in contact with your family and loved ones. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any, oh, there's another one. Thank you. Stephen Seymour?
Okay, I just, what I have to say is not much, but not long. I really appreciated Commissioner Mason when she talked about, have we looked at areas that are not in our neighborhoods? I think we might take a look at how we could get ahead of this instead of waiting for the wireless provider to come and say, let's put it on this street in front of this house. Maybe if we, as the city, and the question from Commissioner Mason was, has the staff looked at areas in the city where we could put these along El Camino or along San Mateo Avenue or in our parks? Maybe if we did a schematic, an aerial schematic, and we looked through the whole city, we could find all of these areas that would support the neighborhoods next to them without putting them in the neighborhoods. And we might find that maybe we could support 70% or 60% or 80% of the city from these locations. So years ago, when working at FedEx, I used to look at aerial schematics all the time when I was determining where we might put our next building, what city we would look in. Because if you do that, you could see where the large areas of land that are open. I think you could do the same thing by looking at a schematic and say, we've got these 15 parks, we've got these major intersections, or these major streets. So I think we could really maybe get ahead of this thing. And then when the carriers come to us and want to be in a particular neighborhood, maybe we could offer them the location that they could put that cell tower in. That's my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment? So before we move on and I guess stop the live televised presentation, I just want to highlight 4 areas that hopefully staff can look into and maybe bring back next month. The question regarding the independent study that had previously been brought up, whether an independent study was done, and if so, if that could be shared. There was a question about how did we get to litigation, maybe just a couple sentences of maybe what that's about. You can speak with counsel about that, but I know that has been talked about with various people. Whether the community can, 3 is whether the community can decide the design and placement. And then the 4th one is whether it's possible to see an aerial schematic of all the city, school, federal, and state property in San Bruno. And so with that said, I'll bring that back to commission. If there's any other comments at this time before.
Through the chair.
Yes, thank you.
I've got these documents that were given to me. I'm going to review them real quickly, share them with my other commissioners, and I'd like to make them part of the permanent record for the evening.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to read each one of them.
No, I mean, there's a lot to take in here, so
Okay. Thank you.
I'll take a few minutes for that.
And anybody else?
Through the chair. Just to kind of bring back to a few questions that were raised by community members. I understand loud and clear, and we've heard many times that many people do not want to see any of this anywhere in a residential neighborhood. Now, it's my understanding that if we as a city made in our ordinance a rule saying there shall be no cellular antennas, cellular facilities in our residential neighborhood, the FCC does not permit that because it would be a moratorium, is my understanding, and we would either that permit would be considered approved because we were not playing by the FCC rules, or we would end up in litigation. I just wanted to clarify with staff. I just want to kind of address that because we keep coming back to the question of can we completely prevent this in our residential neighborhoods, and I wanted to get a response about that.
So we had a presentation before you by our outside counsel, Gail Karish, on October 16th. And she covered a lot of these topics, so I'll just refer to some of the things in her presentation. And this may be leading to an update on the website of a new FAQ to provide that answer.
But I will say the question from a legal standpoint is that, an effective prohibition of service that then could be challenged under the FCC, the federal order, and state law. So, as you know, that law is very new, but we are litigating a denial of an application to install a small cell facility at 123 Elm. So we are already in litigation, so I think we are very aware of our limitations. However, I will emphasize that it is being litigated, so until there's a ruling, it is an area of uncertainty. So I can't provide a definitive answer to your question, but I will say that everything that we have reviewed and what we've been working on with our counsel and our outside counsel, who is an expert in this area of law, which is a very specific area of the law. It appears to be that, but I will emphasize that this is a new law and it's under review, and we hear the comments. So our goal tonight is to move into the community engagement portion where we would like to hear from the community and get the comments. And I think the most important thing to emphasize is that we want to record the comments and be able to provide those to you at your next meeting on this, as well as the city council. So that's our goal tonight. Okay. Thank you.
Anything else before we go?
I would like to thank the public for their very thoughtful comments and the time and effort they've invested in researching the topic. It's a difficult one, and I really appreciate this thoughtfulness.
Okay, thank you. So I believe at this time we will be adjourning.
Yes, so if you can adjourn the meeting to the next meeting, then we will cease the videography. However, I do want to emphasize to everyone that our goal tonight is to leave, or for you to leave, for the community to leave with the community input forms, and there are 3 of them. Do you want to bring up this slide? Yeah. So I want to emphasize, if anyone needs to leave, that you can take the 3 forms with you. These are the community input forms, and we would like to get them emailed back to us so you can drop them off at City Hall by the end of the month. And again, our goal is to use those to be able to communicate the community input back to you at your next meeting and to the City Council ultimately. And for the boards, the instructions are that you have a dot, and you should take 1 dot per person for each board and put your dots on your preference there. It's sort of a voting tool. And we will make every effort to be able to photograph that board and to transcribe it to you in the future. And do you have any other instructions, Michael? Okay, thank you. So at that point, you can adjourn the meeting to the next regularly scheduled Planning Commission meeting. Thank you.
Then meeting adjourned. Thank you.